This is the Tauranga and Western Bay Direct Transport Committee. And a special welcome to, where is he? The Mayor Denia and Councillor Scrimshaw, who are the member and alternate from Western Bay. This is your first official meeting, so welcome to you. And a special welcome to Oliver Haycon. Happy birthday to Oliver. Oh. 21 today, just in case you're all guessing.
We would.
Just remind us, cell phones off, please. And I'll read the live streaming message that we had to put out. I remind members and staff that the public section of this meeting is being live streamed and recorded, and the recording will be made available on the Bay of Plenty Council website following the meeting. I also remind all present that local government decision-making affords no protection to councillors, council officers, and the public for comments made during meetings that are subsequently challenged in a court of law and determined to be slanderous. So, as I said, welcome to you, Mayor Denia and Councillor Scrimshaw. And we now officially appoint you as members of this committee. Just a comment and opening. This committee is designed to be very strategic. We don't want to get into the weeds. We never used to give speaking rights to alternates, but we're trying that out, and as long as you stay out of the weeds, that'll be fine. Nari Atmore has just joined us on Zoom. She is with NZTA. So today, welcome Nari, and I'll call for apologies. I've got Sean Jones of TSP, Councillor Paula Thompson, so Councillor McMillan will be the alternate there today, and Susan Collins. Are there any further apologies? Would someone move? Moved, seconded by, thank you, Mr. Crowder. I just saw you second it. All in favour, please aye. Against, carried. Public forum, there is none. Items not on the agenda, there are none. Order of business, there is no change. Are there any declarations of conflict of interest? There being none. The minutes are to be confirmed. The first thing that they're on page 7 of our agenda starting. First of all, would someone like to confirm them as a transcript record? Councillor McMillan, were you were at the meeting last time?
Yeah.
Yes, you were. And Councillor Crowder. All in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. Matters arising from those minutes, are there any? Councillor McMillan.
I was just wondering if there's any updates on the PTOM, any more cordial with Chris Bishop?
No, that I haven't. I will be seeing him again soon personally, but I purposely have tried to stay away from just while I was getting that RMA reform out. So once we found that we didn't have to change the legislation, that was the urgency for me initially. I just didn't want to hassle them too much while those big announcements on the RMA. I think that it's a question of time. Yeah, so we want. I will be following him up with him. I've sent him an initial email.
Thank you.
Councillor Crowder.
Yeah, thank you. Just wondering if we get just either here or later clarification around the on-demand trial. I've had a number of people in the public, we're out consulting at the moment on different things, and people have raised that as an issue. Just wanting to know what the current sort of end date is or extension date, or
we will go through that, and I think that comes under the update, the projects update. I'm pretty sure I saw.
No, that's fine. Yeah,
yeah, we'll do it. That's right. Now, the Tauranga West Public Transport Hub, a cost breakdown summary was asked for. Have you seen that in the minutes?
So
That's in the report. With the detail, we'll get through that. Okay, nothing really. There'll be no further matters. We'll move on. So we move to reports, and the first report is on governance matters membership, and that's on page 18. That's you, Ollie, I think.
Tēnā koutou katoa. Your first report this morning addresses some governance matters, namely the update in membership, and notes the appointment of Mayor Denyer as the member of this committee, and Councillor Scrimshaw as the alternate. The recommendations can be found on page 18 for your consideration.
very pleased.
Yeah.
Both.
Yep. Mayor Denyer.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for working with us. It's great to have you Scrimshaw alongside me. I think I do want to just note, and perhaps it's an update to recommendation 2, that my council was very happy that we are members, but did express a desire for us to have two reps like TCC and regional council have. I'm not saying it's changed now, but maybe note that was their expressed desire.
That will be known. We certainly won't be changing it in this triennium, so that will be up to the incoming, full bank. So that's fine. Yes, just noting the reasoning that informally on that was it was originally in TCC, but in the regional council was set up, designed for very much for the Tauranga city bus public transport, and it was felt though that we needed to be a bit more strategic and take into account all transport matters that were affecting the city's connectivity, and we felt that there was value in bringing Western Bay in for that reason. But so that's what we're the focus. So we've just widened the focus a little bit, but it's very much now transport orientated rather than just public transport orientated. Would someone like to move? You've moved, Councillor Curran, seconded by Councillor McMillan. All those in favour, please say aye. Oh, you would speak.
Right, I'm really pleased to see you guys here. And the issue around the extra representation, I think, given what the chair said about not talking next training, I can sort of understand that, but in a way not. I would certainly like to see this progress as soon as possible in terms of an item on the next agenda for consideration, whether it be within this training or deferred to later, but we need to consider it formally. So that's my request, is to add a resolution to the effect that this matter that comes up at the next meeting for consideration. And so that next meeting will be in 3 months, quarterly we are, aren't we? Or, no? No? Or frequently?
2 months.
2 months.
30th of May.
Yeah, at the 13th of May committee meeting. Yeah. Was a seconder happy with that? Who's second, Kat? Add that resolution for an item to be on this agenda.
I mean, I was comfortable with just leaving it as is for now. Mayor Denyer has noted what his council said, but you seem pretty comfortable for now that.
I think, if I may, Mr. Chair, my council was sticking up for itself, which is great. My view is that having just set the terms of reference, we probably don't want to be litigating it immediately afterwards. Maybe it's the next term, maybe not. But I also have the view that this is you know, if we're coming down to votes on some of these issues, we're probably doing something wrong. So, you know, I'm relatively comfortable about that, but yeah, I think perhaps I'd like it noted, and I think the recommendation that this may be up for consideration at a future point may be appropriate, but you know, when that is.
Thank you, and if I can speak further, it's just getting in preparation ready for the next training, so, you know, I can't see why we couldn't do that work, and so we're all set to roll on, whoever the new representatives are. So, could I seek a seconder for the motion?
Councillor
I guess my sense of it might be that if, I mean, it's probably different for us as TCC councillors without the election, but I'm wondering if it's better to have that at the first meeting of the next training, that it comes up so that it's formally in the agenda for that first meeting, which will be in November or whenever. I just wonder if that might be a way through it, and then maybe the seconder might be able to agree to that. But
That makes sense to me.
So for the first meeting in the new training,
That's fine. So you're formally moving that and you're seconding that. Any further discussion? All in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. We move then on to page 21, which is the joint public transport projects update. And that is going to be Matthew, is going to read that, and
Not sure. No, we've got Sean.
yeah, and Sean. Thank you, Sean.
Morning, everyone, and thank you for that, Mr. Chair. I'd like to take the report as read, but I would just highlight one particularly cool point about on demand, and that is just the other week we had over 1,100 users using the service, which is absolutely excellent and a testament to how well it's sort of doing. So no further from me. Thank you.
And sorry, just from a Tauranga City Council perspective, I would just like to highlight that our Durham Street stops are almost complete with the reinstatement of the planting now happening. We also have the Cameron Road Stage 2 will be due for a follow-up in very, very soon. So we'll be reporting back on that a bit more next meeting. And in 1.12, you'll find the cost breakdown of the Tauranga Drive PT hub.
Thank you. Any questions? I've got a question to start with. It's one of timing. The 1.2, the connecting 15th Ave Carrot Road. I want to get, we'll have a further discussion on this, I'm sure, at the end, towards the end of the meeting, but I just want to get a feel from TCC what what's the envisaged timing is for this work, so we have a clearer understanding.
Yeah, I can comment on that. In terms of where we're at in the process, we are about to go to tender, and that documentation will be out within the next week or 10 days or so to the market, and we are expecting to go through that. It's an ECI, which is an early contractor involvement, so. That's looking for a partnership between a designer and a builder. So we will have all of a year, I think, in round numbers to go through the design for that. And as we stated in the report, we're expecting construction in the summer of 26-27.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Taylor.
Item 1.4. Pretty sure I went to an opening for that about 6 months ago.
Yes, so that was stage one. That was the public transport facility component. Stage two is around some improvements to the area that were discussed with the community and to be rolled out subsequently to the bus facility. So there's planting some a shared path arrangement down that more towards forget the road, sorry, more towards the roundabouts and connecting through. Yes, sorry, Concord.
So nothing really to do with the bus stop.
Related through the conversations to get the bus hub across the line with the community.
Councillor.
Oh, it just,
Crowther.
I think just for, I've got a few questions, but just for clarification, the reworked Cameron Road stage 2, how different is that to the current completed stage 1? Would it no longer look similar? Like, just in a nutshell, I mean, I know there's there's a lot in this, but yeah, what are the key differences with the reworked version?
Yeah, I can respond to that. It's yet to be decided. So we're going through a process now with our council to see what options we have to progress something without the central government or the NCTA funding, because we do know that they are not going to support it. So between developer contributions, IFF and other funding arrangements, including our own funding for it, what can we do with that envelope of funding to get us to a point? So we are looking at options for that, but I guess I'd have to say that it would look very different just because of the funding scenario.
So could it be, for example, that there's nice wide shared paths and cycleways and then not when you get to the stage 2?
Well, I guess that's yet to be decided. If we had the funding, of course we would do what's best for the city and continue with the current look and feel and functionality of Cameron Road Stage 1. So what we have been asked to do is to put up proposals as to what we can do with the funding that we have got.
Yeah.
And that can, for instance, be the different options, right? We can use the funding that we have to create a similar look and feel past the hospital and for a very short length of or we can alter the look and feel and have a lower level of service in terms of mode shift options to take us further towards
I suppose this kind of leads and segues into my overall concern and sort of, I suppose, strategic challenge is we know with the current, the current GPS that we're kind of hamstrung for mode shift and reduced emissions transport systems after so what I'm afraid of is us committing, I mean, I know I can't speak for TCC, but what it looks like to me for this region is if we commit funding to things that are substandard just to fit in with the current GPS, these are projects that take years to build, and then when you get a different colour of government that changes the GPS back to, oh, actually we need mode shift, we've got air quality issues, we've got emissions issues, we said we wanted people to be connected and physically active and engaged with their with their outdoor environment. Suddenly you're going, oh well, sorry, we can't do that now because we've actually built all of this infrastructure and it's now dangerous for cyclists, it's dangerous, there's not room for good PT service, we can't put trains in, we can't blah blah blah. So my focus at the moment is thinking, okay, well, where can you secure land or build things in a way that you can then retrofit in a really good enhanced mode shift way when the GPS shifts. And I suppose that's the lens that I'm trying to look at. And so that kind of leads me on to the other thing, which was the Connecting Mount Maunganui. And thank you, Ollie. I know you sent me, I haven't had time to read it, like the comparison of the scaled back version of Connecting Mount Maunganui. But again, it's like, are we thinking about securing the land or the spatial planning that allows us in future to put those facilities in, or are we shooting ourselves in the foot for the next 30 years? That's kind of my question.
Yeah, very good comments, and the decisions are yet to be made on that, because we just because the GPS stipulates something now, and we could potentially rewrite the business case to suit the GPS, that might not be what council would like for the city.
Yeah.
And council, of course, have a big input into the investment in it. So then, of course, it wouldn't make the decision to go ahead with that.
Then we don't have the funding because we don't have the 51%.
Exactly right,
So
and that's why you need to wait for these. If the city wants to develop the look and feel of the current stage further out, with central government funding, it needs to wait for another government policy statement. That's really the fact of the matter. Or alternatively, do something different with the money that it has got without the hypothecated funding from NCTA.
Yeah.
And their options that we're about to put up, I think it is late April, early May, to our council for consideration, and of course happy to share with this forum as well.
yeah, I suppose I just urge that the vision is with future generations in mind, not to fit in with government, flavour of the day government GPS. I mean, I know you have to work to that and under that. I'm not disputing that, going against, but that the filling in, like the colouring in of the sub-region is bared in mind when actually building any infrastructure, that, yeah, we can colour that in later when it allows. That's, yeah, I know I don't have the jurisdiction to, but that is the vision that I would love this sub-region to uphold.
Yeah, acknowledge that, and that's why I think the joint committee is a good forum, because you are now sharing that view with our decision makers.
Thank you. So Councillor Crowther and then Councillor Taylor.
Yeah, and I acknowledge your concerns, Kat, and I think, I've sort of spoken to some of those when we had our discussion on Connecting Mount Maunganui, and to have our council kind of build a project along Maunganui Road and then to be told that we probably have to make significant changes to enhance public transport there, and then to find that we're not going to get funding for other public transport components. And particularly for me, the concern on Connecting Mount is rail. If we are trying to get modal shift, and I remember Gary Weber in this room constantly saying the real game changer will be freight to and from the port, if you can get well above the 50% level on trains. And if we're going to do that and we're going to have the growth in freight, we need to actually, in my view, do something a bit better along the lines that actually Larry Baldock talked to me once about, in terms of rerouting rail or putting grade separation or doing something to future-proof rail along there for 30 years from now, when the freight, presumably, if the world doesn't spin apart before then, that it'll be quite significant growth in freight. But that wasn't my question, actually. My question was, I've got two. One is the Tauranga transport model. I was just trying to decode what it says. It says this delay is due incomplete information from all partners on their project implementation stages and funding status for the model future horizon years. And I'm struggling to decide.
So traffic modelling, like most modelling, is all about assumptions. And this talks to a lot of those future year assumptions that at the moment as staff, we're really struggling to understand where to put projects within the time frame of that model and what those projects are going to look like, so that we can model those assumptions.
So does that come back to us, meaning probably the three of us here from Tauranga City Council, actually being clear about what years in the long-term plan we want TCC projects, or in our council's case, is it things like that, or is it a more integrated issue than that?
So yes, it's to a point. Yes, there's things that we have in, for example, the long-term plan, but actually much further looking than that. So it goes up to 2048 as an example, and we're just trying to pick through that. Where should we be putting, especially some of those future years assumptions?
And through you, Mr. Chair, just a bit more information on that. It's important that we agree the timing as a group and a series of organisations on what horizon or years to put these projects in, including what we'll tell you. Because the projects we're doing quite at the moment, 15th Avenue, Kimberley Stage 2, Tauranga West and whatnot, have a major effect on how that model operates. So we have to have a general agreement to say, even though we don't actually know, we're going to assume a date or assume an implementation phase about then. And I think that's what that statement's really about, is that we have to be comfortable organisationally that that's the right time frame to put those particular projects in, and that's really what that means.
And my other question was probably, I think, for Oliver, around smart trip variable road pricing. So the three of us here from TCC had a briefing on a potential submission from our council, which will be coming to a meeting, our next meeting in a few weeks. So the view from Tauranga City Councillors was that the proposed legislation was not appropriate in the sense that it gives NZTA and the government a lot of discretion around where the funding that could be received would end up going to. And so the view expressed in the discussion seemed to be heading towards, we would like Tauranga people's revenue to come to Tauranga, and we're happy for others to have the same result. But what we were told was that the Oakland Regional Council was likely to support a New Zealand-wide regional council's submission, which had a different approach to it. So I'm just wondering if is that the case? And secondly, is there some sort of initial thinking in terms of what the rationale would be for taking a different approach rather than to leave the revenue in the area where the people paid?
So through the chair, we are inputting into a regional sectors submission on the matter. We've also said that we're happy to explore supporting local submission as well. In terms of that specific nuance, I'm happy to make an inquiry and update you later in the meeting.
I think it's fair to say, I think I'm probably personally open to it, but I think the view that I got the sense that it'd be unlikely that a majority of my colleagues would shift from wanting to keep the revenue in Tauranga. So it'd be nice to sort of be able to collaborate on it, but certainly if there was a different view, it'd be nice to know that sooner rather than later, so we could try to understand what the pros and cons are around it.
Just for complete clarity, so the draft that staff have been progressing for a regional sector submission is yet to be shared with regional councillors, so it does not currently represent the view of the regional council.
Two points I'd like to make. 1.9, the smart trip variable road pricing submission. Our council will be making a submission on that, and so it's just a bit of collaboration just to make sure the key messages are aligned. And secondly, on the speed management plan, I'd be interested in TCC staff views on some of the, try not to get too much in the weeds, Mr. Chairman, but we're running into the issue where, because the funding for LCLR has been removed, that actually funding these speed speed limit sign changes, particularly for schools, which might be electronic and more expensive, actually quite challenging. And I'm just wondering if staff could share how they are managing that or intend to manage it, because there's quite a few schools around Tauranga.
Yes, so that first point, yeah, we'll make sure that as staff we are talking to your staff around what our submission for that variable road pricing is looking like, and sharing what we have there on the speed management plan. So we were lucky enough within Tauranga City Council to have money allocated under the last NLTP to install those signs. So we have installed under the previous funding arrangement predominantly all of our variable electronic signs, knowing that then we could spend 51% of central government's money on them. And that's sort of how we got around it. Of yes, there will be some adjustments, but predominantly the infrastructure was installed under a previous funding arrangement.
That's helpful, thank you.
Councillor Curran.
Further to colleague Councillor Crowther regarding the road pricing initiative, I think to clarify it a little on that, basically TCC would like any revenues extracted from the Tauranga area to be reinvested back into the Tauranga area to directly benefit those who are paying. Who manages that? Who's given the role, whether it be split between local and central by NZTA or the various councils, it is not so much the issue. If it all went to NZTA, but under a policy of strict criteria that any revenues extracted from here get reinvested in here, I think that would satisfy that. Would you agree with that, Councillor Crowther? So we're not saying that it comes to TCC or kept in, yeah, just.
Anything further on the update? I know that the Tauranga City is talking about turning Hewlett's Road into a T3 rather than a bus lane. And just my cautionary thing I'm all for T3s in non-peak times, but of course the only time you really need it is in the peak time. But because that is the big incentive for using a bus is in the morning peak and the afternoon peak, that they can get well ahead of the traffic by using the bus, and that encourages people to use the bus. As soon as you take that away, the incentive to use the bus goes away to a degree. So I think we need to be very careful how that's managed. You want to comment?
Sorry, Mr. Chair, I was communicating with Ollie with hand signals, but to your point, Hewlett's Road will be run by the state of NZTA, and whilst we are very intimately involved in the project, I think operationally they'll set the parameters around that sort of thing. But that sort of feedback is exactly the feedback really needs, and we're more than happy to carry that through into the way that the concept of operations gets designed. So what things are they prioritising at what times and the detail of it. But I think Nari probably knows more about the progress in that project than we do.
Nari, would you like to give us a bit of update?
Sure. So the update on that is probably through our project update in the next. Can you hear me?
You're a little bit quiet, but we're trying to adjust it here.
Okay, sorry about that. So we do have, I did just send through an update to the action that was remaining regarding the BCR for the T3 managed lanes. So that's been calculated at 7.7 over a 10-year period, which is a relatively high BCR. We are looking at the funding that we need to progress the T3 lane. I don't at this stage have any further updates on the operational side of it, but that is, as just said, really relevant feedback. So quite happy to take that back. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Ollie.
Just an update. Council. So we've worked closely with project partners on connecting Mount Maunganui. Some high-level modelling has been done on priority for buses, and I think it's important to acknowledge that there are a number of tools in the box when it comes to bus priority, and that's a spectrum, everything from full-time permanent bus lanes through to softer measures such as signal priority. What the high-level modelling showed here was T3 offers ever so slightly more benefits to buses than a dedicated bus lane. And the reason for that is that because you can increase your traffic flow down the Hewletts Road corridor, it slightly reduces levels of congestion on the Harbour Bridge. So actually speeds buses up on the Harbour Bridge to get them onto the Hewletts Road corridor quicker. So it did actually deliver in the high-level modelling slightly higher benefits than dedicated bus lanes alone. So from a staff perspective, we were comfortable with that being taken forwards and explored further should a detailed business case commence.
Thank you for that. Yeah, Councillor.
I could just ask a question, very mindful of your comments regarding the T3 lane, and I thought Oliver's comments were very helpful. But my question was, is there an understanding of how many vehicles would qualify to use the T3 lane? Because I think it would be quite a small number based on my observations.
I'm happy to answer that, but I'm speaking on behalf of NZTA that have led this work. So yes, that did form part of the modelling. The challenge you've got is you want to provide useful capacity to users of the road, but you don't want too many people to go into that lane and then deplete the benefits that you're providing to bus travel times. My understanding is what the modelling showed was that T3 was the point where you still receive benefits. At T2, you started to significantly degrade the performance of the public transport network.
Through you, Mr. Chair, just so it's about 3 to 4% for the T3. Those was the assumptions.
Would someone like, and any regional council staff like to comment on the on-demand trial that was questioned as part of the minutes?
I can take that through you, Mr. Chair. So that discussion is going through the annual plan process as we speak. So we need to wait for the process of that to come to a conclusion in terms of an extension going forward.
Yeah, and it's just to note that the average passengers per week at 800 per week is compared to 700 per month with the previous big bus service. So it's been very successful on a patronage basis.
And further to Matthew's comments, so staff have been making efforts to improve the performance of that service to try and improve the cost per passenger. So we've been making some tweaks behind the scenes, and we've managed to get a significant reduction in out of service kilometres, so effectively the number of kilometres that the vehicles are travelling without passengers on board, which we're hoping will improve the commercials of that service. So that will be coming to the Public Transport Committee in due course, where you will get sort of a detailed 12-month review of the service.
Councillor, correct?
In terms of the annual plan process and consideration of potentially extending the service, is there anything more that can be shared publicly in this committee in terms of where that potentially is at? Some detail.
I can confirm that staff have provided council with some options around an extension. But what I would say is any extension that council might ask staff to explore would need to be negotiated, and therefore we would like to not talk about it any further in a public setting at this time.
Rather,
I guess bearing that in mind, I won't ask the full question I was going to ask, but I'll make the comment probably that that part of the city will be impacted by the 15th turret project at various times in the construction. So my understanding is that will start in the 2026 calendar year in terms of some action on the ground. And the pointy end of it will probably be a bit later on than that. And I guess there's a lot of moving pieces and we might want to cover that in the next session, but I think you know, anything that happens to any of the bus services, and I note the school services also on the list here, that will have a massive impact in terms of congestion, as everyone in the room probably realises. So I guess I just urge that we keep in touch through this committee and informally and any other way possible to try to work through how these things are going to interact, because if hypothetically there was no on-demand in the southern suburbs, there was limited school services from Morecambe Bay, and we were closing sections of that busy piece of road and network for months on end. And I'm not saying that will happen, but you know, if that's what the plan results in, we would need to look at how to deal with that. And I think, you know, like I said, we might want to talk about that more in the next.
Through you, Mr. Chair, just in response to Councillor Crowther's comments, I just note the Regional Council are very much across the impacts that that particular project in 15th Ave and the closure may have, and that we're working really closely with Tauranga City Council regarding potential options to mitigate those impacts on our PT services. Thanks.
One thing that I'd like to raise with TCC is when we set our last bus contract, 2016, it was based on the premise of AFTI at the time for connected centres. And I have a vision when we get to the next contract period that we will have it more like an orbiter bus service internally around the city, connecting with smaller buses, that satellite buses that do the thing. Now, that whether that's right or wrong, that's just a view I have. But the original connected centres relied upon a bus hub being available in Brookfield. And I just wonder, has that gone, is that still on the radar of TCC, or has it just slipped? And I know funding's a huge issue for you, and getting support for that is an issue, but it's gone quiet. But if we want to get a Marta or Brookfield, maybe even Bethlehem, coming into a Brookfield hub, it would require a connected centre. And so any update that you could give us as to thoughts, I know it's funding constraints, but thoughts on that matter.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I feel like that's a loaded gun. But at the same time, our annual planning process is underway right now for the next financial year. The LTP is when we do a true job of mapping out the 10 years. So at this stage, we are transitioning from what was a very friendly GPS towards public transport infrastructure and service improvements and whatnot to what the GPS we have now. So those types of improvements have been pushed back in time. They're certainly not planned in the next 3 years. And that's as a result of the fact that the government has not funded any new improvement projects for local authorities. So that means we've had to receive funding from what we say an approval for funding for projects that were already in flight, but no more. So with that in mind, we've had to adjust our expectations around what we can do very, very strictly to that letter. And council will be presented with choices around what to do about this in the next annual planning processes and whatnot. So the short answer to that is it's not on the list right now, but council then needs the chance to have a look at what that long list looks like, the implications for that, particularly with regard to the conversations in this committee and whatnot. So we're moving towards that. So I can't give you a straight answer about when, but it's certainly not planned on our program for the next 3 years.
Councillor Brown.
mention Brookfield Bus Hub without me speaking to it. Like, I completely agree with the chair. And I think that whilst I acknowledge Mike's point, which is very valid, it comes back to what Councillor McMillan was saying earlier, that we need a robust plan that is fit for this sub-region, and it shouldn't depend on the whims of government funding what the plan is. So my concern is there's two parts to it. One is what Mike has addressed, which is when the timing for something. But my concern is the ranking of that piece of infrastructure in the TSP, the vital nature of having quality bus hubs to make a public transport system work, and priority bus lanes and other mechanisms to prioritise public transport. And none of that has been given any prominence. So we have I was waiting for the public transport services and infrastructure business case, which has been delayed again. And at some point, I think we have to just figure out what the plan is, because I thought, based on AFTI and based on the initial TSP, that those pieces of kit were really, really important for our public service, for our public transport services. And yet we've done a heavily compromised solution at the crossing, which I don't think looks good at all, from both a road, like a trucking point of view, and a public transport user point of view. And there are complaints online, and I'm getting complaints about this design is going to cause congestion in Tauranga, and I don't know if it does or not, but I do know that it's a heavily compromised investment from TCC, and that's the history of Tauranga City Council on public transport. And we have had moments in recent years where we've had the perfect government to get that funding, but we haven't been in a position for some reason to take advantage of that funding. And I think we need to actually make sure we know the moment there is a change in the GPS, and I don't think it would necessarily be just under a Labour Greens government. I think National's Transport Minister has made comments saying that he supports public transport in major cities, and in metro cities was a term that I think was used once by him, that I heard, and we're right on that boundary. If we can line up our ducks and show that we're ready to go, and we need this for economic productivity, which I think we will, at the moment, I have no idea if Brookfield is just someone's fantasy, or whether it actually is a realistic thing that needs to get into our 10-year plan. And I don't see why it wouldn't, because without it, I don't think that whole model that the chairman has outlined in your, what I think is a valid option of describing that AFTI plan, I don't see how we could deliver it at a practical level on the ground, unless you spend so much more money, and you guys can't afford, as regional council can't afford to spend the money it takes to overcome the lack of infrastructure, really.
Through you, Chair, just reflecting on some of your comments there, Councillor Crowther, and perhaps adding to some of the points that Mike made. I think the next round of long-term plans is the opportunity to reconfirm the shared vision for where we want to get to in transport. And my view is, with the reboot of this committee, the rewriting of the terms of reference, this committee presents a really good environment for the councils to get alignment as to what vision they want to put into LTPs in 18 months' time. And then that can also then feed into the regional land transport plans to put us in the best position to get the funding to deliver on that as a sub-region. I think there is a lot of work that needs to be done over the next 18 months. Some might say that the plans that we had previously were overly ambitious, and I think there is the work to be done to understand what the correct journey is, what the correct trajectory is for us to get to where we need to as a sub-region, and therefore what projects each council needs to focus on to do its bit to realise that future. So my suggestion would be that staff work together to bring you those strategic decisions over the next 18 months, so we can go into the next LTP, next NLTF funding round, lockstep around what we want to achieve.
Thank you. Yeah, Councillor.
Thanks, yeah, I totally support what you're saying there, Ollie, and I wonder if to set us up for success in that, we might have a rebriefing of UFTI, bring it to the fore. I mean, there's newly elected councillors since UFTI was really in all of our faces. So I think I'm wondering if I could propose that we have a rebriefing of UFTI. And then the other thing that's also connected to what you're saying there is this, and this is something as Councillor Thompson has talked about this a number of times, this centre of excellence idea that the three of our councils work together, you know, in order to really enhance that collaboration and shared vision. My thoughts are having a centre of excellence for the sub-regions transport would really enable that. So I don't know what that looks like on the ground and where that is in the thinking, but I think those two things, having UFTI brought to the front and also thinking about, okay, how would we enable a centre of excellence, would really get our ducks in a row, as people are saying, you know, being able to get our ducks in a row so that we're not, you know, the flowers aren't bending in the winds of the government of the day, that we're actually a bit more strategic and long-term focused. So I don't know if I can propose that we action or explore those two things. I don't know.
Councillor Taylor.
I'd just like to have a chat with staff about item 4.4, national ticketing solution. That seems to have been delayed to the never never. Our recovery and the private share of the ticketing money was hinged on that starting in June. What do we think the implications are that we're delaying? I presume we're delaying price changing until that comes out. Is that where we're at?
Yeah, so through the chair, yeah, your assumption there is correct, Councillor Taylor. A number of the initiatives that were proposed through the fares review require the technology that NTS brings to implement. We have entered into private share revenue recovery targets with NZTA, but those targets are predicated on the assumption that NTS will be introduced. Currently, we don't have an implementation date, but NZTA will be confirming the programme over the next 4 to 6 weeks, we've been told. We have done modelling in-house as to the financial implications associated with a delay and have sort of factored that risk into our forecasts.
Mr. Chair, can I just check, what was the reason for the delay? I wasn't aware that it had been delayed, but perhaps you can highlight.
So the national ticketing solution is a national project being led by NZTA. So it brings integrated ticketing across the whole of New Zealand. So one payment method, regardless of where you are across the country. It's an incredibly complex project, and it is running slower than anticipated. So the NTS is being introduced first in Christchurch, so it's been trialled on the Christchurch airport service at the moment, and that trial has been broadly successful. However, the next step is to roll it out in Timaru. My understanding is they're working through some teething issues with the system there, so the programme overall is running with a delay.
So just to let you know that I've been a little bit aggressive with our staff on this matter, in so much as we did a fares review for public transport in December, and it went through our full council. And yes, to bring it in without the NTS, there's certain aspects that you can't do. So you can't, you know, some of the incentives for side rather than the disincentives, i.e. price increases, can be countered somewhat with the NTS. But in my view, we cannot afford to have to wait a year after a council makes a decision to do a price change, and I looked at other transport operators around the country, and Auckland, for instance, do an annual review of prices. And yes, they in 2020, 2021 through COVID, wherever that was, 21, 22, they had a zero increase, but every other year they've done small incremental increases so that we don't have to have big hits on our which affect patronage. So it's just small incrementals covering the cost of inflation or whatever, to me makes sense. And I don't think, my argument is that it doesn't need an NTS to do that. We can actually, it's not optimised. The optimal would be to have the NTS with the benefits as well as the stick as well as the carrot. It would be better, but we can't afford to wait. I don't think. That's just my view, which I've handed on to staff about a little bit. But that's something that we will need to think about, because it affects, it's like the on-demand buses. We are on the 28th of April going to increase the price on that, because we did survey our people using it, and they acknowledged it was a premium service and they were prepared to pay more for it because it's such good service. And so that is going to happen actually on the 28th of April. But the problem with our whole public transport system is, I think it's the percentage of paying users is too low. It's in the 20s%. 1/5 of people pay for the service, and it might be high. I can't remember what it certainly was 27% for the on-demand, and I can't remember what it was for the other bus services. But we have to address this, and we have addressed it, but we haven't implemented it.
Councillor Taylor. Don't want to labour the point, but is central government going to be okay with this delay in the software being an excuse for us not moving on the private share increase that we've been told to get?
Through the chair, my view is they don't really have a choice.
I've noted that what you said regarding the private share, and talk to our PT team.
Thank you. Councillor.
Just going back to my previous point, sorry, I just wanted to make a recommendation so that we have a rebriefing of UFTI is the first recommendation, and the second is that we explore a centre of excellence model.
I'm happy to have a rebrief of UFTI, but you could ask, recognise that anything that you do in this area puts a lot of time and effort constraint on staff, and it would have to be the three councils, or at least two councils, or maybe the three councils, that you're putting an added workload on them. And
yeah, just happy to comment on the Centre of Excellence. So last year, prior to the suggestions of changes of terms of reference for this committee, we did a root and branch review of the TSP and how we are currently structured to work together. And we identified a spectrum of options. You have the extreme end of the spectrum where you create some sort of combined authority for transport, right down to sort of the previous way of working, which is effectively us all operating in our separate environments and collaborating on an ad hoc basis. What we agreed as staff is, in the first instance, the best step to take was to have some sort of enhanced level of collaboration and be more deliberate about how we work together. So I don't think we are taking the prospect of moving towards some sort of more formal centre of excellence type model in the future, but we felt, in terms of where we are on the curve at the moment, the best first step to take was to explore more formal ways of collaborating. which is something that we are implementing as staff and is working really well. And Mike might well talk to more fulsomely in his TSP updates later in this meeting.
Okay, so let's separate them out though. So if we can have the recommendation to have a rebriefing of UFTI, then what you're saying, Ollie, I'm picking is that you are already on the rungs of the ladder of the pathway to whether it's a physical centre of excellence, but having a model where you are basically joined at the hip. And I would like in my recommendation to have that there in writing, that we continue to enhance, and I don't know how we want to word that, perhaps staff can help, but I want to capture it, because what we're talking about here is moving forward to the end of a triennium, that, you know, then going forwards to the next LTP. And, you know, this is the essence of what I'm saying here, is we want to capture the intent of this. So I appreciate you're saying you're already on that journey. It's how do we consolidate that is a journey we're on, and that's what I want to capture. So
Brilliant, Mr. Chair, I think, and to build on what Ollie's saying, I think we can be clear with this committee about what the mechanism for that to happen is, and it is something along the lines of we are on this spectrum of possibility, which at one end is a full combination, but the collaboration model, and I think we could present that back to the committee around this is how we intend to work, but it is inextricably linked to the work plan in the committee. So the committee should decide what are the issues and the items and whatnot that need to be most collaborated on, so that we can allocate our resources. And then we can agree that those things are indeed important for this group to want us to go and chase after, because that enables us to be more planned and structured. So perhaps a recommendation in and around this committee's work plan linked to the way we work, which is a collaborative model moving forward.
And I'd just like to congratulate Tauranga City and Plenty Regional Council staff, because that's why this committee was set up in the first place, was that there was not a good alignment between the two organisations, and it has, I've watched over the last 4 years, it has 3 years, it has hugely improved. So I think we're on a very good trajectory. Once you start talking of going beyond collaboration, you really rely on probably a unitary council mechanism, which I see your mayors starting to talk about. And that's another argument for a future day.
So perhaps if the recommendation step 2, the UFTI is one, the other one is a presentation on exactly what, Mike's got it, he's nailed it. It's a start.
What do you got for us? You got some wording. Glenn.
Yeah, I just want to support what Councillor McMillan's been saying. I think that thinking back to the previous item, it might be helpful at the start of the next triennium to do a kind of an integrated report to the committee at that point, whoever's on it, and to have, and just bearing in mind we've got the TSP item coming up, something that integrates, like I think UFTI is critical, because for years basically anyone who knew anything about UFTI was told we can do this because of UFTI, we can't do this because of UFTI. It became a very sort of rigid planning tool in my view, and now you never hear about it. I don't know if my colleagues have really heard about UFTI since becoming councillors. So it's gone from one extreme to the other, and I think we need to know what is UFTI, meaning not what we can obviously read the document, but what is it in terms of reality, and then how is it currently feeding into TSP, or how is TSP currently feeding off it, or whatever you describe. But I'm also mindful that by the time the new triennium presumably will be a lot clearer in terms of RMA reforms and other initiatives, and of waters for that matter, the future of our waters in the sub-region. And if I look at one scenario, we will have a completely different planning landscape and a different financing and possibly funding mechanisms for growth projects. So we could be in a really different landscape. I don't feel I've got my head around that, and I think collectively at our council we are just getting glimpses of what could happen. Presumably mayors are a bit more plugged into it, but it just strikes me that conversation is going to have profound implications for transport. And I'm thinking of the local government futures work that happened probably a decade ago now, would it be, for those of you who are around, which was looking at the future of transport structures such as the Centre of Excellence, but also like how it integrates with waters, all those kind of conversations. We could be dealing with a CCO for waters, working with multiple councils on transport projects. You know, all that has implications, and I'd personally like to get an integrated report on here's the state of play as of whenever that meeting is in November for the newcomers, if there are any, to the committee, or the people who'll be coming back, and to just see where we're at then, but particularly with that focus, like Kat says, on the practicalities of AFTI TSP. What is the actual plan, as opposed to what is the hundreds of pages of document? That's fine, but what is the the elevator pitch for what are we going to do to deliver a functioning transport system? So that'd be my plug and strong support. However, whether or not it's like I'm saying, it's just I support whatever we can get to clarify that.
Okay. So that's all right, what you've got there. So is that what you want? You see what's on the board?
Thank you, yeah.
All right, so you're moving that, and
No, moving on with other issues on the report.
yeah, but you can. I thought you'd finished.
So there's a couple of items there, page 25, item 3.2, Takitimu North. I know we had some discussion at TCC regarding the deterrent factor for the level of tolling. The current proposed toll we consider would deter a lot of people from using that road, which would affect TCC roads, the local ones through Bethlehem, if a whole lot of people decide to take the existing road, and also in Western Bay, some of the roading there. Moving on to the next stage, if the tolling is too high, a lot of people will just use the existing road because the actual distance is different in terms of the incentive to use the toll road. So has TCC had any response? I know there was going to be some contact with NZTA and discussion around any flexibility around that level of toll to lessen that deterrent factor.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So just inherently within tolling proposals, the diversionary effect of pricing on that particular road is modelled, and the impacts are socialised with stakeholders, particularly ourselves and regional council. I think in terms of the appetite for changing toll pricing and whatnot, Mari would be better to answer that type of question, but you're right, there is an inherent link between the two. And we're aware of that link, and there is a State Highway 2 replication project that is also cognizant of the changing demand and traffic flows that are happening. So it is within the project. Whether that is good or bad or of sufficient comfort for councillors, that's a different question. And I think it's definitely in terms of the way to price it and the appetite for price changes. I think Nari is definitely the best person to answer that question.
Nari, would you like to comment?
Sure. So I do understand that there has been formal response letters sent to all of the councils in regards to the submissions that were put in towards the end of last year around our tolling proposals that went out. As has been said, there is significant modelling that does happen around those tolling proposals. So that does take into account the effects of different levels of pricing. I guess we in our assessment and analysis were comfortable with what was proposed. And yeah, the decision essentially goes to the minister and has been made. So
Thank you. So in terms of the policy, if you call it that, of NZTA, in terms of a level of diversion that NZTA would accept, is that expressed as a percentage? And if so, what would that percentage be that NZTA would be comfortable with in terms of that diversion factor?
that's a pretty technical question that I don't have to hand the answer, I'm afraid, but I can certainly find out.
That would be really helpful. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so we have, through Mr. Chair, we have received that as an RE states, and we'd be happy to include it in the minutes, for instance, to this meeting, so that the committee is aware.
Thank you.
Question to staff. So it's not on this list of projects and things that are coming up, but imminently on the horizon, there's a renegotiation or a reset of the contract we use for running our public transport system, I believe. It looks still to be a while away. I think it's 27, is that the correct date? Time has a habit of shifting pretty quickly. How far advanced are we on understanding what we're going to be asking for in the new contract? And I'm specifically thinking about performance measures in that contract. The three of us had some private discussions with a few guys that are in the business sector and talked to them about getting their employees to use public transport a couple of weeks ago. They were very concerned that they'd like to help us out and promote public transport through their businesses, but one of the issues that they had was the performance of the network and people turning up for a bus that never arrived, buses that were late, people not getting to their meetings on time, that sort of stuff. So trying to understand what we're thinking 2 years out from having to renew our contracts and whether we're going to get a better result through that contract negotiation.
Through you, Chair. Yeah, absolutely. I hope that we would make significant steps forwards with a new contract. Addressing the points around network reliability, the challenges we face at the moment are the unpredictability of Tauranga's traffic and trying to operate scheduled services in Tauranga is very challenging. It's not just the intensity of the peak traffic, but it's the variability that we see across the week in terms of travel time makes on-time performance very difficult. That being said, there are things that we can explore to try and improve punctuality. Most of those involve putting more resources into the timetable, which have a cost implication. In terms of the work to understand what we want to buy from a new contract, that work is being progressed through this calendar year. So we would be looking at confirming through committee and ultimately regional council what we want to buy early next calendar year to allow that procurement to be undertaken if we are to re-procure that contract in December 2027. With the transition that we're likely to see to zero emission vehicles, if we let that contract, there will be a reasonably lengthy mobilisation period. So you do need to have those contracts signed about 12 months before the start of the new service to allow the new operator to invest in the vehicles, to get all the infrastructure online to support them, etc. So expect to see conversations about that as we progress through this year.
Yep,
Yeah, all valid points, and they go to what I was saying. I really am worried about this performance thing because the performance is how you're going to get numbers growing on the buses. I've tried the buses myself. I've tried to use them constantly. I would have been late for my very first council meeting if the bus just never turned up. So these are the real things that will make a difference on how we populate the public transport going forward. So to me, we need to really focus on that. I know it's a difficult situation with traffic, but that can't be excuse for buses not performing, if you like. We almost need to have some kind of a stick to go with the carrot when we're doing the contracts.
and through you, Chair, just to expand on some of my comments. So we looked at the cost of making our current timetable more resilient to the variable traffic conditions. That was estimated to bring an additional operating cost of about $2 million a year to put additional resources into the timetable to make it more reliable. So the challenge we have in a constrained funding environment is to get those extra resources in. We need to take resources out of the timetable elsewhere. So we're left having to make these difficult decisions of, do you sacrifice service in some parts of the city to improve reliability in others? That is work that we are undertaking to look at options, which will be presented to either this committee or the Public Transport Committee. But it is very much likely to be a borrowing from Peter to pay Paul type situation to address some of these concerns in the short term. With on what a shoestring the timetable operates on.
Councillor Crowther.
Yeah, I guess because it's come up, I've been sort of pondering this lately and trying to look back at some of the reports showing where the complaints are, where the time delays are and things. And I, to be honest, I'm probably not smart enough to see all the patterns there, because it looks to me like we have some problems all around the city. And I've been thinking, well, we don't actually have any big projects running in areas that you would think the bus service would be majorly impacted by, because they're on the outskirts of the city where our major projects are. And we don't have a lot of, roadworks right now, for instance, that I see, sort of at the end of season type timing. So I'm thinking, yeah, buses are still not running, and presumably it's not because of the route that they're on necessarily, it's the previous route potentially, which has delayed them getting to the start of this particular route. So when I look at that, I kind of go, well, what about when we do our projects? And this will be bedlam. And I completely agree with Councillor Taylor, but I also think, well, who am I kind of, if you like, complaining to? It's to myself, because we're in charge of actually putting the infrastructure in place to ensure that your services can run around the city in a timely way. And so the arterial upgrades, I guess where I was going with it, that we're waiting for a report on arterial upgrades to help us get through the 15th turret project. And if we were to do something on Cameron 2, stage 2, then that would presumably also support that project. But my own personal view is I'm not really expecting staff to be able to pull any big rabbits out of the hat, because it looks to me like we all know where the roads are, we all know what they look like, we know how much money it costs to do stuff. So then it comes down to, presumably, is there another model around public transport with which the chairman had outlined earlier, where you have, and I'm thinking just to use an example, because it's probably simpler to convey it, that if we've got 4 bus routes, I know you're making a change to the Automoto routes, or Matua routes, but we've got 4 services there costing several millions of dollars per year. Is there a more cost-effective way? And getting back to the earlier point, does it require infrastructure from Tauranga to enable that? But we tend to be pushing that down the road. We're sort of saying, let's figure that out in the LTP, and then we'll apply for funding, and maybe we won't get it, and then it'll be 2030s. And I'm thinking we've got in the hundreds of millions of dollars being spent on transport projects. Wouldn't it be more cost effective for the city to actually figure that out sooner? Because if the solution is to actually do an on-demand service in the southern suburbs and to change some routes, shouldn't we know that sooner rather than later? And similarly for when we're doing other projects. So I'm sort of throwing a whole lot out there. I'm not expecting a direct response, but it just strikes me that we still have a gap, getting back to Kat's point earlier. And the reason why some of us are still looking at this centre of excellence is that we've still got a bunch of councillors holding back funding, and I'm one of them, holding back funding from public transport improvements, and the government is. And then we've got regional council feeling very constrained in terms of the services, and we're getting bad outcomes. And I don't see a pathway through it. I'd like to see at least the pathway, not the solution.
That's why that's why we're, having this discussion today, and I can assure you, staff have been I've been raising it individually with, in my meetings with, the general manager, on a regular basis, and I'm very happy that they are thinking quite strategically going into the 2027 new contract, and because we cannot wait till 2027 to develop it. We did that in 2016, and what happened, Tauranga City in that contract did not have any funding in that first 3 years, and so we had to wait, so that put it on the back foot. We weren't aligned then, and I feel we're a lot more aligned now, but you're dead right, KPIs for the operator to perform, they've been doing that in Canterbury. I remember I was down there in about 2007, and they had KPIs based on when the bus got into the hub back in Christchurch, but the original, there was if they were 5 minutes late, there was, a substantive fine way back then, so that they made it monetary, and they kept their buses on time. We have an issue right now. I was talking to an operator, one of the lady drivers who's been driving for 16 years, and she said around Matua, even if there's no one to pick up, she can't meet the timetable. So and I've relayed that to staff, and I'll take that on. We have to get better at what we're doing. There's no two ways about that. But there's a huge willingness by staff to understand and recognise the issue, is what I'm saying.
So just to respond to a couple of Councillor Crowder's points, they're all good points. And I can give you the assurance we're not going to wait until 2027 to start to address some of these things. There are things that we can address with almost immediate effect, and we are doing. So, for example, we're taking the opportunity when we move to the new interchange on Dome Street South to make some changes to routes, as you acknowledged. So one of those is taking out outbound 52X trips. So those are the express trips to the lakes, because very few people are travelling out of town in the morning. Those vehicles can then potentially be redistributed to support with reliability elsewhere on the network. The other thing we're doing is combining Route 70 and 71. There are two things we're achieving there. One is addressing some of the performance issues that we experience in Matua, and one of the idiosyncrasies of our network, where some routes terminate halfway through at Cherrywood for an operational reason that I won't indulge the committee with. And the other one is we run the 70, which is broadly an express service down Narsai Road, which is used during peak periods, but isn't used during the middle of the day. So we are taking the opportunity to make the timetable work better, but also remove services which are very lightly loaded, and allow those resources to be used elsewhere, or deliver a financial saving if that resource is not needed. So there are things that we're doing in flight, and I wanted to give you that confidence. The other point I wanted to make was around the public transport services and infrastructure business case, which was a significant effort during the last period of the NLTF. That looked at developing a combined response between the regional council, the city council, Western Bay, and NZTA. What services, what service model should we be operating in the future to deliver against the connected centres within NFT, and then what infrastructure is required to support that. The model that was chosen was predominantly a through-routed network, so routes starting one side of the city, transiting all the way to the other. Big benefit there is that passengers don't have to interchange in the city centre, which ranks as one of the highest things that deters people from using the bus network. The prospect of having to change between buses and the uncertainty and risk that adds to journeys. Tauranga being Tauranga, a lot of our journeys are cross town, people going from Gritton to the Mounts, or Papamoa to Otamotai. So it's a model that we felt really suited our city and implemented against the connected centres vision. The challenge with that model is with the length of those routes, you require a lot of PT priority. Earlier, I mentioned using this committee to effectively retest what that strategic vision and shared vision might be between councils. And what I was really getting at there is, if we don't think that we can get the priority to support that PT network, then to Councillor Von Elson's points, what sort of model is then best suited to Tauranga, and therefore what do partners need to do to contribute towards it. So the reason that we are going on that journey over the next 12 months is because we need to, I think we acknowledge that we need to revisit the public transport services solution, because in the current landscape, it is not deliverable in the form that it was envisaged in the short to medium term future.
And just to add to those comments, councillors, is that in echoing Ollie's concerns, there's some latent pieces of work that we need to do to put on that work plan we talked about earlier. And one of the elements there is that that strategic context has shifted under our feet. And we talked about this in the workshop that we had last week, and some of those things are operational, like the network disruption presentation we've got later today, to give you a sense of what are the network-wide effects of construction projects and whatnot, so the council can consider the real-time and the current sort of effects on the system with regard to public transport and to the rest of the users. So we intend to use this committee as the forum which these issues can be pulled together, and that a work plan will outline kind of an order of priority, because a lot of these issues are deep. And they need talking about, and they need to have some staffing and clear direction around those. So we intend for that work plan to really put that into a nice structured order and to go through it. With regard to the UFTI element, we absolutely intend to cascade down through the UFTI and ask those questions as we go, because they have material impact on the way that we design our projects and the order of the programs of the infrastructure that we have. So it is really, really important, and it's very clear for Ollie and myself. We need some help around what is the version of priority that we need going forward. So I guess the message I'm delivering here is we're intent on using this committee to do that element, to clear up a direction of travel around these issues.
Okay, last question.
Yeah, I guess it's not a question, it's a comment, which is that I think Ollie has nailed for me the key issue, which is that if we want a functioning transport system in Tauranga, my observation of the evidence, or interpretation of it, is that we need a good public transport system. It seems like cycling and walking and everything will have a role. Cars will continue to have a major role, but to avoid the levels of congestion, we need a viable alternative. And our council has talked a lot, sort of from time to time, around the congestion charging, road pricing. I get the sense there are a number of councillors who are interested in seeing where that will lead to, but wherever we go on that, we need an alternative, because there will be a number of people, as we all know, that will be having to travel at peak times, and to put in place road pricing without a good alternative is, I think, beating up on people who we shouldn't be. So given all that, I'm both relieved to hear your comments, Ollie, that you've acknowledged the critical issue that we're facing in terms of, will the interpretation of the UFTI model be viable to do long routes across the city? But I'm also quite perturbed to hear it, because we know the whole basis for our investment that we've virtually finished, our investment on Durham Street. The whole basis for that was through routes across the city. We would not, well, I certainly would never have supported an investment of that level in the type of infrastructure we're building there if it was to be a different model, because I think something like the Christchurch facility works so much better if you have a model that's not along through routes, which of course meaning with supported by public transport priority, because it has to be reliable. So if we're going to have either long through routes which have delays, stacking of buses and things, or if we're going to have a hub and spoke model, or we're going to have a hybrid model, I think that has major implications for the infrastructure. And again, it comes back to the points that have been made by my regional council colleagues around Brookfield, Tauranga, all these hubs. So we're actually building the Brooklyn things and we don't even know what our system's gonna look like, and we're leaving the contract in a year and a bit, and I'm just, you know, I don't wanna sound too harsh about it, but it just seems like we're absolutely not in a good position, if I refrain from saying what's on my mind, but it is a serious, serious problem for the city. It is the number one issue for the city. Transport constantly rates as the number one issue, and constantly in vital signs update, it reinforced that public transport is something that the people of Tauranga want to improve. I presume the people of Western Bay are maybe a little bit, you know, less hopeful that they will get great public transport in certain remote areas, but I would hope that Te Puke and Umakaroa could be included in my description of the Tauranga PT system. So I just, you know, I'm belabouring it a little bit, but I just think we can't stress the importance of this, and we need to lift that up, the priority and the urgency to the highest, you know, code red would be my view.
All right, we're gonna pull this to a close.
One more item, yes, not to do with this, another topic on the agenda.
Oh my God. We're half an hour over already, but they're gone in.
Item 3.3 on page 26 around the state highway revocation. And one road that was revoked many years ago was the section of Tortura Street between Hewletts and Hull Road. But given the ongoing growth around the port and its activities and the impact it has on that road, you know, the road users, etc., we've sort of talked about potentially redesignating that as a state highway. So the question to Nairi, if I could ask, and perhaps get back to us later, if you're unaware of the process, but is there a process? I recall a few years back there's a state highway review process, and that happened I think every 5 years or so, where NZTA or Transit at the time looked at all state highways and you know, decided which was appropriate to revoke or actually initiate in terms of a state highway status. Does that still exist? But if it doesn't, is there a mechanism for TCC to request NZTA to reconsider the status of that section of Tortura Street and return it back to a state highway status?
Yeah, I'm not sure if there is still a regular process, but I imagine there probably is. I would, it's very dependent on obviously traffic volume. There'll be very high standards, I would imagine, that would need to be met, but I can certainly find out about that. Yes, as I say, I'm not sure if that's a cyclical process still, or if it's case by case, but there's definitely some processes that do exist.
Thank you. If you can get back to the committee on that, that'd be great. Appreciate
Absolutely.
it.
Right.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, but I just thought it would be helpful if the committee members aren't aware, at a recent Tauranga City Council meeting, we sort of delayed a decision on connecting Mount Maunganui, so we have to look at whether to sort of fast track some investment in the business case there, and I presume staff are well informed between the different councils, but just to make it clear in this committee that is, for me, another key strategic issue we've got to deal with. Our number one project in the sub-region, we can't get government funding for a business case. I guess I was the elected member who probably pushed that to get a report back in July, I think was where we settled, so that we could see if there were opportunities for external funding or other considerations. I guess just putting it out there, it was a bit of a, you know, I guess for me it was kick the ball downfield and see where it lands and who wants to play the game. But whatever happens, I guess for me, if we are serious about dealing with congestion in that area, which is such a key piece of infrastructure, I think somehow we, and I'll speak for Tauranga City Council, we have to make sure that business case happens. But I'm realistic that I don't think a majority of my colleagues are keen to put up 5 million without any government co-funding. So I think we have a really big problem. I just want to raise it here. This is a key forum for transport. It is the number one project, as I say. If anyone has any thoughts on how to do that, you know, we elected members need to have some conversations, but you know, I think it's going to be tricky to get external funding, but I just think we need to somehow get that over the line one way or the other. There's hope that it may not be quite the 5 million. I think that's fair to say, but I don't know how low that number can go. But my colleagues will probably, I think it's, you know, they probably will reach a point where they push the button on go, but I don't know what that point is. But we need to get that done, or else it'll be late 20. If you're not clear, it'll be late 2030s according to our agenda.
And the city cannot afford that time delay on it. That has been identified as a number one priority. And it's really disappointing that NZTA has not supported the business case for that to go to the next stage. And so, Mari, you'll have to take a pay cut, I'm sorry. But somehow you've got to find ways to fund that, because as it stands, it doesn't get into the program until at least 2030, and that means that it won't actually get completed till about 2039, and it's already showing serious signs of congestion now, and you can't do that without doing Elizabeth Street as well. So it's a double problem, but that's something for NZTA to ponder on when you've got plenty of time. So thank you for raising that. Yeah, that was a mission. All right, are we going to move the? You had a motion. Was it you that?
Sure. Yeah.
Was you
The recommendations, I think I've moved.
No, you seconded. Well, you amended.
My amended ones, I was.
Yeah, so the original mover was Councillor Kurat, and you're the seconder. And
no discussion. Not me.
so there they are. So receives the report and requests a debriefing on AFI and requests staff present the collaborative model for council teams to deliver the committee work plan. Any discussion? All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. So we're going to break now for, let's break for a quarter of an hour. There's a cup of tea sitting up there, and that was going to happen at 10:30. It's now 7 minutes past 11, so we're running a little bit late.
Just so that's fitting.
And we move. So we are now on to the home straight. The update on the structure of the transport system plan, page 30. And that is going to be Mike.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't intend to go through the report and take it as read and take questions, but just as a bit of a preamble. In terms of the way that the Tauranga system plan team and governance works, there's been a fairly significant push right across the sector for us to make savings around how we operate. I think it's true for all of the organisations that are participants in TSP, and as such, we've looked at the model of how we do things. One of the key elements there is the reaction to the environment that we're in currently around the amount of funding that we have, the amount of work in front of us with regard to the program itself. It's not to say that there isn't work to do, particularly in the, say, property space or the committee space, but certainly with the TSP space, the need for having people engaged to support the program directly has changed, and also with regard to how often it meets and what it needs to cover. There's no point in having these sorts of meetings if the agendas aren't full and decisions are critical to be made. So at that point, we wrote a paper to put together to the, what was the ESG at the time, to reduce it, put it on a hibernation mode with the intent of increasing and scaling up when necessary and as agreed by partners, and take out the costs in the proposal. Most directly is the cost of having our consultant being part of the proposal and the amount of governance meetings. So that was the main context. It's still an intent to run the meeting on a less regular basis to make sure that we keep the program on the right track. And for example, one of the issues that we need to make sure that we nail down is it's linked with this committee, and how does the TSP make sure that it reports in and connects with the conversations and the intent, particularly in the work plan here. And that's one of the issues that we will be working through as part of the work plan here. Happy to take questions.
Red?
Yeah, I guess I'm still sort of heard, you know, what you've just said and a little bit of background to this, but I would have thought, given this sort of strategic nature of this, that it would have been a better idea seeing we just set up a committee that was basically geared around, you know, having all the TSP partners here and reporting to this committee, and we clarified that the not the OSG, was it whatever the ESG, that they're not a governance group. It just seems like, is that an operational decision? Is that a more of a strategic governance level decision? Because I guess I'm still sort of struggling. If what you say is correct, then do we need a TSP? You know, that's kind of where I go to, because if we need a TSP, I would say we need a TSP that is integrated into this committee more than Tauranga has ever needed one, because we just covered in the last section, we may not even have, like AFTI may not be fit for purpose, TSP itself may not be fit for purpose in the extent of that business case for public transport, with if we can't have through, you know, long through routes, the whole model falls apart. That means the infrastructure plan is not fit for purpose. We've got a funding crisis, you know, all these things that we know. I would have thought that would be the very time for us to say, how do we deal with all that? Well, we need TSP to rework its whole program to say, what are the implications? And we have a small period of time to get everything, all our ducks lined up for 2027. So if scaling back TSP is the answer, then I guess I'd like to know what question TSP is going to answer.
Through you, Mr. Chair, everything you've said is still the intent for the team to be able to deliver on. So the idea with this, and what was particularly an operational matter, was that we felt that particularly with the council teams, perhaps having more capacity in the current environment, could take over that work and do it ourselves in one house. It was aligned with the collaborative approach that we wanted to take with this committee. And so the expectation of what TSP needs to be, absolutely needs to be landed in this committee, and then worked through by council teams. And in this collaborative approach, I think that that's probably the best way for us to be able to satisfy the needs moving forward. One of the key parts is we wanted to make sure we integrated the work program of this committee and the TSP group. This enables us to have a much closer eye on it and to be part of it, as well as saving the sort of considerable costs associated with externalising it. And that was the main sort of thrust of it, is that we do not want to see a drop in level of service or activity. And to your points, I think there's a lot to do. But we felt that our staff teams would be better able to cope with that and to deliver on that promise and front up to this committee around what it needs to do.
Ollie?
Just further to Mike's points, in its simplest form, what the TSP is a shared program of strategic transport projects required to deliver whatever the vision is, and that vision is broadly delivering the FD Connected Centres model. And over the years, we've tried a couple of different ways of both managing and governing that program. And I don't think in that, to that extent, anything is changing. There is still going to be a centrally held program. It's just that myself, Mike, Susan Collins, and Cedric Rowe from Western Bay will oversee the management of that rather than that being externally facilitated. But what we are proposing is that we enhance the governance over that programme by giving this committee more of a role in overseeing that, whereas previously that didn't sort of directly come to the joint committee. So from that respect, I don't think there's much of a significant change. I think we can all agree that we still need to hold that combined view of what those strategic projects are, who needs to have responsibility for delivering them, what sequence it should go in, and understanding what funding opportunities are available.
So, from my point of view, I'm very relaxed that there is the capability within the combined councils to do the work. So TSP mustn't fail because it's the strategy, but it's just bringing it in-house as a funding constraint. You know, recognising the lack of capacity we have for funding. It just makes imminent sense to me that we bring it in-house and support staff, as long as the staff do that strategic work. I don't think we have to, anything has to fall by the wayside. That's just my view.
I guess my concern is, I don't disagree with it, but I don't feel we've got any evidence to make a decision. If, in fact, I don't know if there is a decision, in which case I think there should be a decision for this committee, because I think that's what we set up the process was for governance in Tauranga, Western Bay and regional to make decisions like this. And the reason I can give an example where Tauranga City Council has brought some operations in-house. We initially got told it would save money. We've now got evidence that it probably won't save money, but it might still be a good thing to do. I'm not arguing the merits of that. But, sometimes I think if you don't go through the evidence around it, and so I guess what I would like personally is to see the budget for the TSP, to see what the external budget is and was, and what the proposed impacts on the internal budgets are, because ultimately what we've said quite clearly in one of the earlier meetings, I remember Councillor Thompson and myself talking about it as a key priority in the work plan when we did that. So the work plan was to go out to the people of Tauranga and Western Bay and say, here's the TSP, this is your transport plan. The commissioners and others didn't tell you about it, but here it is. And we are doing something about transport, and here's what we're proposing to do. And this has been delivered by a collaborative approach. And there was going to be, in my mind, and I jumped one step too far, was Sean presumably would be the person who would be the face of it. And I know that the committee would have a lot of respect for Sean, but more importantly, I saw the fact that he was an independent person, not associated with Tauranga City Council in particular, could be quite an advantage, because we, putting it bluntly, have, when I walk around the city, I get a lot of criticism about the previous projects that have been delivered in the city around transport, out at Greaton, in Cameron Road, Stage 1, etc. And to have some face of transport in our sub-region to go out and actually lead an engagement process, I thought could have been worth some investment. And I understand it could be too much investment for us to want to fund, but it just raises all those questions. And I keep thinking that's a key, it's something every week I deal with people in the city who are complaining about transport and what Tauranga City Council does around transport. And I just want to understand how we can actually address those issues and who is going to actually be sort of the face of that campaign to actually, because I think that's what will win people over, to actually just have something to say, we're hearing what you said, we've got a plan to remedy it, and we're working methodically through it, and we've funded the plan, hopefully, if we can get to that point in 2027.
Through you, Mr. Chair, there's quite a few points in what you've just said. The ones that I probably want to address are in around the expectation of TSP at this governance group and this committee. So currently, we have a terms of reference that sits within the TSB and its governance group, and that basically stipulates how the partners work together and how staff relate to that particular proposal. It was set up in order to make sure that staff and resources and the right amount of effort were put to the right problems, and it solved the problem of the day. With regard to the membership of that ESG, it does include external partners that are not present on this committee either. And it's a process by which we are defining that relationship between that group of people and this committee. And it's absolutely in that paper that you've got in front of you that we need to rewrite those terms of references to make sure that that linkage is clear, to address some of the issues that you've raised. So right at the bottom, we've got what are the next steps? And there's a little bit of matter of process. So when we make this turn, we do this collectively and in the right way. And so the kind of things that we talked about, not only in the last workshop, Councillor Thompson's been talking about this for quite some time, that we've reflected that in the new structure. So this committee is one of those steps that we took along the way as a group of people to make sure that we're being more collaborative and TSB becomes connected. If we're not doing it fast enough, then we can put the accelerator down on that. But at the same time, it is absolutely our intent to address those things through this committee and that particular place. With regard to the costs and whatnot, those were fulsome in the report that went to ESG. And one of the key factors here is that one of our key partners, Local Tahi, were very keen on understanding what we were spending dollars on, why we were doing it, and asked us to undertake a closer look at that. And I think in the context of this committee's expectations and that folding into the ESG, we felt that moving to this space was a good operational decision, and it'll enable this committee to get the right kind of feedback from that group and connect it to this committee as well. So with regard to the paper itself, we're outlining what we would do next, and that is definitely a closer relationship between the work plan and expectations here and what the staff actually do.
Further to Mike's comments through you, Chair, I just wanted to address some of the points around transparency that you raised, Councillor Crowley. And those are things that we've considered through sort of the update of the terms of reference and the intent to bring more issues to this committee. I mean, ultimately, there are two outputs from the TSP. There's that programme of strategic projects, which needs to be prioritised, and ultimately those go into the regional land transport plan to seek funding through that process. That is a statutory process that is consulted on and is done in a transparent way. And the view is that deciding what those projects should be, the priority of those, is something that we can use this committee to help us understand, and then this committee can make a recommendation to the regional transport committee. The other thing that the TSB can do is suggest some shorter term improvements to the network. So you'll have heard me and Mike talk around sort of reviews into optimizations and efficiencies out on the network in the sub-region. And again, those are things that we would want to bring to this committee to discuss. So our response on that transparency side of things is we're looking to bring things to this committee and use it as the opportunity to be much more transparent in how we are planning and what we're proposing, and giving you as elected members the opportunity to steer and influence what's within that programme.
Yes, I'd have thought that things like budgets and things that go, I suppose it's just trying to understand what's governance and what's operational, but I would have thought budget for TSP would be of interest to governance, and I would have thought it would have been. I was surprised it wasn't in here when I heard this was going to be reported, because I just have no idea. You know, I don't know if you can tell us, but I have no idea if we're on a budget of, you know, a few $100,000 or a few million, or how it's divvied up between the external and internal.
Through you, Mr. Chair, so the operating costs and the planned work within the TSP program was in the order of $700,000 per annum. And the cost breakdown of that we can provide to you at a later date. But from my perspective, the questions that started getting asked is, does the work plan actually match the context and the environment we're in? And that was the question that got raised to staff around, well, are we orientating ourselves properly around what's coming forward? Hence what you saw it as an operational response.
Any further questions? then would someone like to move that we receive that report, please? Councillor McMillan, seconded by Councillor Crowther. All in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. We then move to the discussion on opportunities for disruption mitigation during the major roading projects. That's going to be a round table.
So through you, Chair, I'll just introduce this item. So this is coming to this committee following a resolution that was made at the Public Transport Committee at its last meeting. This is broadly a discussion facilitated by elected members to provide staff with some direction, but we do have a presentation just to outline the current situation and some initial thoughts from staff.
Yeah, the paper needs to.
Good afternoon all. So I'll just run through a couple of slides and, oh, sorry, still morning. Yeah, just run through a couple of slides and I'll let you just jump in at each slide as you'd like. So just trying to facilitate that discussion. There we go. So I just wanted to touch on a very high level concept of intervention on the transport network as a first step. So this talks to the fact that planning and good planning is by far the lowest cost intervention on our network. So for example, making sure that we don't do too much on our network at once from a construction perspective is an example of that planning. Managing demand, that's always a interesting political conversation because it ends up talking to not everybody using something that they would like to use, all the way through to new infrastructure such as a new highway, where we do try to get that balance is in the best use of the existing system. And just also wanted to touch on from a slightly more in detail perspective, if we're talking about a project such as 15th Turret, but connecting Mount Rongonui is the same, we are really talking about the corridors that will be impacted by the route change, by the construction, but also by the diversions in place that people will naturally flow to. So, for example, predominantly with the projects that we're talking about, the central corridor down the Te Papa Peninsula and the eastern corridor out towards Welcome Bay, Papamoa, Te Puke, and such will be the corridors that will see the most disruption from this change or from this work. So I would, welcome at any point any opening conversation around those first two slides. We'll then move into a bit more detail around how the network currently operates and what we as staff are starting to look at.
I think at this point, I just like to highlight the middle bullet, the point there, managing expectations is absolutely critical, because you can see when roadworks start, you see all the questions, why are they doing it all at night? Why are you not doing it at school holidays? Why are you doing it over Christmas? All these things, which are varying degrees, practical or impractical. And if you just get ahead of that curve and just explain it, that's a lot of the battle. Because once you get ahead of steam that it's being managed incompetently somehow, or not to someone's expectations, should we say, it's hard to get that message back.
We've definitely found through, in particular, Cameron Road Stage 1, that consistent level of consistency, that if we've got something closed or we've got something at one lane, not changing it every day is a key element of that. Managing expectations, we are also looking into how we can communicate wider on, look, we expect this amount of delay. Sorry, we definitely can't promise that there won't be any delay with a lot of this construction going on.
Councillor.
Thank you. So just considering disruption in a context of a current project that TCC is looking at, and that's the 15th Avenue Tauranga Road. And I understand that will be staged. But thinking about minimising the disruption, would it be possible to say if there's works on the city-bound direction that a number of those are staged to avoid closing for a period to do one little stage and then closing again to do another little stage in that direction, and trying to align all those projects or phases of projects. So when you do have closures in one direction, that would more work would be undertaken. I know it's a resourcing issue, but has that been looked at in terms of minimising disruption? If you get my drift.
That will be looked at. So we, as referenced previously, we are going through, or about to go through a procurement process with early contractor involvement. That will include designing the details in a way that it can be built as effectively as possible and as efficiently as possible. Also pulling together how we can ensure that that the disruption is minimised from a staging perspective where possible.
And just to add to that, Mr. Chair, I think it's really important to get on the balcony with this. I know that the issue will be intimately involved with our communities and customers, and it'll be very, very important for everyone. The ECI model allows a contractor to figure out the best way to construct it and manage that problem. If you take examples that have happened elsewhere, they're the best frontline people to figure out whether the way they're going to build something is going to affect the traffic and how they can improve it. So it's an innovation opportunity for them to get it right. And I think incentivizing them through that contract model is a really important carrot, actually, for them to be on that space. So what is it that we have to do as clients is the like comment from Mayor Denny around the expectations, because ultimately the reputational risk rests with councils and everybody, because any councillor will get an earful if things are bad. Doesn't matter which council they come from, actually. And so we will, that's one of the things that we're going to have to try and get right. So it is one of the single biggest issues that we're worried about, but we believe and we have confidence that the ECI model is a great way to do it. The people who have to put the cones out, have to dig the holes and actually have to manage people who don't turn up to work when it rains and all that sort of thing are really very much the right people to innovate around how to keep that traffic flowing. So it'll be really important that the contract incentivises their behaviour.
So are you envisaging, the Tauranga Road, 15th Ave, are you envisaging traffic diversion methodology, i.e. the Ohaui, what's that road? It's Oropi was what I was looking for. The Oropi roundabout, bringing the Welcome Bay traffic up there for it, to close it for a short time and get the work done completely, which means, changing the traffic flows and what we don't know is what the ongoing problem from that is. Have you looked at those sort of because I think if we can close it completely and get as much done as possible in the shortest amount of time will actually be the best solution long term. But I'm no expert.
I'll touch on that in a few slides' time, if I may. I had noticed that the Deputy Mayor had wanted to say something, and then I'll move on to that component.
Maybe, that was Councillor Springfield.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that fundamental, I think, is when we're having significant closures like this, that alternative routes, we work really hard to minimise disruptions there. It's nothing upsets. One of the things that really upsets travellers is to be told you've got to take an alternative route, and then they go and sit and wait there because there's roadworks going on. And like Mike's just been saying, doesn't even need to be in our district, we still get clobbered for those sort of things.
Yes, absolutely, and so that's part of the conversation that we're having of aligning works so that we're not doing significant road renewals, for example, on those alternative routes where possible.
Yeah.
There may still be emergency works that are required, but that's.
Yeah, I do realise these are big projects and there may be times, but as I say, that's why I said minimise, not avoid.
Okay. So we do have a system currently that monitors our network for average speeds on roads. This is a bit of a flick through of the average speed on sections of road at different times of the morning and afternoon peak. This is average on a weekday, excluding public holidays and school holidays. So you'll see that at 7:30 till 7:45, as we know, it's not great, but it's not the worst. And then we get up to that 8 o'clock through to 9 o'clock period, where you see a lot more dark red growing. So this is our existing network condition. And then in the afternoon, it's almost a reverse from around 3:30. The internal area of town of the city is a dark red, and that slowly propagates out. So that's a bit of an idea of the data that we are working on at the moment. We are currently working through pulling this data through into some modelling of if we, for example, were to close 15th Ave and Harrod Road, what would that mean for the network?
Councillor Kerr. Thanks, Sean. What I was looking at particularly was Fraser Street, the peaks, and there's already red there.
Yes, so that leads, I might flick through, I'll come back to that slide. But yes, our alternative routes are do not have the sufficient capacity for it. They potentially did 10 years ago or more when we were looking at originally doing the project until it got delayed successive times. And that does mean that, yes, we are going to be building through congestion, and we are looking at infrastructure improvements on those alternative routes as quick, low-hanging fruit fixes to some of those points of congestion. So some of those do sit on the state highway. We've just gone through a long list process with staff around pulling together what those options do look like. Fraser Street, for example, the roundabout at Oropi on 29A, the Chadwick roundabout, and that Parkvale roundabout set is a key component of that congestion. So we are looking at quick fixes to resolve.
Just in addition to that, Mr. Chair, I think it's safe to conclude, based on that previous information, that our customers' experiences are going to be different during this project. The kind of improvements and opportunities we can make in order to help that will be addressing more in the way of a reliable journey, might be reliably slow journey, than a complete gridlock. So we're trying to impress upon you that the system is at a level of capacity that when this project goes live, in whatever form, parts of it may reach that point of level of service F and beyond, which is in traffic engineering world cataclysm, but that stops people And that's the kind of thing we're seeking to avoid by doing small improvements here and there. But they're not a silver bullet. They will ease the pain. They will not necessarily solve it until the project is finished. The project itself is the solve. So communicating, managing expectations, and getting our customers used to what new journeys that they need to take is absolutely part of the consideration of the project. But it is a very significant link in our transport system, this route.
So NZTA have experienced the concept of total closure, and I'm thinking of State Highway 1 recently through the Central Plateau. And so with the experience, because it looks to me, I don't know how much time you save by having a total closure, you know, what period of time it would take to do 15th Avenue versus, you know, doing night works, doing, you know, try to accommodate some you know, we're still going to need diversions, but, you know, are you guys, have you modelled that?
The short answer is it will be part of the modelling, and it is part of the suite of potential that the project will go through. So we will definitely be asking the project questions. The shorter time you're on site, the more, the less cost it is as well. So there's other benefits that can play through here. However, there's construction issues and challenges that we're not always aware of. So being able to manifest a full closure for a certain amount of time with the right gear at the right times and enough working room and keeping it safe. Those are the things that an ECI starts to unpack and figure out and can balance it out. So that chart up there really just shows you the dimensions of what's considered. So yes, that's a scenario, as are other types of scenarios, including having one lane open and other things like that. So it's very much in the forefront of their minds.
So this chart talks to the concept of you can spend more money and get less impact. However, that will often prolong the suffering as well. Or you can spend less money and typically a closure does mean that construction costs less. However, its impact is significant. The question for that ECI contractor when we go through that procurement and get them on board is how long would a closure need to take so that we can start to talk about that extreme of the options.
Has NZTA got any, you know, because they've only really recently gone to full closure of, you know, in the past they've tried to do it on a method of partial closures. Do you have any experience, you know, any evidence as to the cost benefit of full closure, Ari?
So I know that is not, they have been tracking that as part of the closures on State Highway 1. That information isn't yet available because it's not, because it's only just done those works. However, I know there are some significant lessons learnt. They have talked about what has come up through doing that work in those total closures. So I imagine that there would be, we would have information and lessons that would be more than happy to share.
Well,
when you do the ECI, do you actually, as part of that process, find out sort of indicative timeframes before you choose the preferred contractor, or do you only really find out to any significant detail once you've chosen them? So in other words, would you know, like there's a suite of, you know, that this consortium would likely require closures for this period, whereas this contractor would only close it this period?
We'll bring Jason Spencer up to
Council. Yeah, I mean, as we go through the procurement process and the RI goes out and the RFP process happens, and when we go through the TEP, which is the tender evaluation, when we start to go through that, that's when we'll start to tease out through a two-stage process, what is actually coming back through, what is going to be formulating part of our weighting procedure to make sure what we want to see, what they are offering as a tier one principal contractor and who they are partnering with, etc. And all these items will go through the evaluation process to then take it through to the second stage that will then work through with the principal and make sure that what we believe as being delivered is going to be delivered in line with what we set out in the RFP.
The question is if, maybe it might be jumping the gun a bit, but as part of the project funding, can that be used quite liberally, if I use that word, to, for instance, subsidise public transport opportunities from southern suburbs, or eastern as we're calling it today, to get to their destination? Is that something that can be within the project funding that TCC and NZTA could fund, or does that require a conversation with regional council to look at potentially changing services or boosting services for periods?
Through you, Mr. Chair. The projects and the funding aren't specific in that nature. So what the business case will outline is that we think that there's a potential negative effect from construction, and that we think the cost of managing that construction will be X. The solutions and responses to that cost are project identified, and then we just go in and check with Waikato that we can indeed use funding that way. But there are solutions that are quite novel that have been used in the past around the country for these things. So without explicitly saying yes, we can certainly suggest innovative and novel ways of managing what we think is a great risk of the project, particularly if it's showing it saves money and time.
It's not a kayaking business.
So the other item that I'd just add on the slide is around that making the most disruption when demands are lower. So that is used quite intensively on metro rail networks as an example of you close something so you can really just get in and build it quickly when there's lower demands. 15th Ave and the Tauranga Road Bridge in particular, there are some complexities around that also, and that period of lower demand, also interacting with the turns and how we can. So we may not be able to do it on Tauranga Road because we need to protect the turns.
Can I just ask a quick question about the turns? So they're not actually, that they're going to stay resident there and the work's going to be done around them? Is that?
That is the current understanding of where the consent conditions are looking.
So my question is, are they secure in light of the government RMA reform and the timing of all of this and the potential disregard to endangered species? Are we confident that they are definitely going to be protected along with the Pahutakawa?
I would hate to make a policy call such as that at the moment. Well, too many open doors, I would suggest, at this point in time to be able to give you an absolute.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose on that, I think the city would be absolutely up in arms if there was any risk to those birds and the Pahutakawa. So I'm just raising it, that it could potentially become a challenge, but I'm hoping that we've got that baked in.
Can I just answer further on that? On both of those items that you've brought up. The Pehuda Towers, no, we are keeping within the curb lines there, so we're not looking at touching the Pehuda Towers at all. There may be some trimming that we may have to do just on the overheads, simply because of the gantries that are going to go up and the signs that would be there. But we'll go through the appropriate channels to make sure that happens. When we're talking about the turns, we've got some early enabling works that we have scheduled in that takes part of those piers away, but it also addresses through the ecology that we've done with a number of consultant parties of where and how those turns are going to then re-nest and part of the platforms that we're going to provide with regards to those nesting there. But unfortunately, these things have wings and they will fly and they will go over to where they habitat quite a lot at the moment, which is over at the Z station as well and on the roofs around those buildings. But there is also a 4-month period during construction, especially from October through to February, which is their breeding season, that we are limited on effectively exclusion zone around where they may be then nesting in around those existing piers on the Harini Bridge, which means that we can't really go and do any construction works in and around that point. That's not to say the whole corridor we can do the works as staged further up, etc. But there is a period that we can't do any works there unless that we go for departures and relaxations, but I don't think we'll actually get them.
Thank you.
Follow up, probably from like the flip side of that then, given that I imagine 15th Ave won't be the big issue for this project, the big issue will be turret and the bridge in terms of, you know, there's no possible detours and things. So my understanding that for the both years of the project, there wouldn't be able to be much work done from those period, from basically the summer period would not be, and the whole of summer holidays would not be possible to do that key work along there. Did I interpret that correctly?
Interpreted correctly, that there's a 4-month period that there'll be certain perimeter exclusion zones around some of those piers. It doesn't necessarily mean that we cannot work on certain parts of the bridge. It just means that there's certain areas that we won't be able to, but we would have that staged in as part of the ECI process.
I guess I'm just looking, do you have in your mind at this stage, given that I think at TCC we sort of signalled we're keen to use holiday periods and things, you know, like, is 2 weeks really make a, you know, like, it's going to give much benefit if we, and what are the implications of doing that work in the middle of winter, say, rather than in the middle of summer? I'm just, I guess this is not something I'd probably spent the time to think through, but the implications of it do seem quite significant from the project, because I was imagining, looking at the timeline, that potentially a summer and the holidays in a couple of years or whatever was going to be when there'd be a significant amount of work done on that Turret Road Bridge area. So the question is sort of when will it be done, I suppose.
That's the whole point of the ECI process, and making sure that whoever we work with are going to come up with the best methodology going forward, etc. But it's not going to be easy. It's always going to be a difficult point in time to program that in appropriately, unless that we are successful in getting those departures from that period of time for those turns.
2 or 3 years, Mr. Chair. I think just in summary though, is at this stage, we can't anticipate those changes. We are following and tracking in terms of the regulatory environment we already have. So we must plan on that basis. The project team is confident that solutions can be found in order to try and balance up some of those concerns, but it's not as clear cut as doing it in summer only, or not doing the bridge, or protecting the turns. There are always going to be trade-offs. So I think what we're trying to impart is that the project's ECI is aware those trade-offs get made, but overall we think that the project is still on track to deliver on those things.
And we are placing some degree of faith in our contractors and our ECI model to help solve those problems, to get down to those exact details that you're talking about, and making the most of it. Perhaps they'll come up with a way of building a bridge a lot different than we're thinking, or some other construction methodology we are not yet aware of. And that's the purpose of trying to canvass our supply chain to make sure that works, because they're the best people to try and figure that out, and not necessarily ourselves. So we give them the parameters in which they should work, and they'll come back with those ideas and possibly some out of the box stuff that we completely don't know about. And that's part of the testing process. So can't give you details right now, but we are confident that we've got the right setup.
So, sorry, just moving back to this slide. This is where we're talking about interventions of those alternative routes, and also around how we do protect those alternative routes as much as possible. There's concepts of how do we provide for bus T2 or T3 priority to provide mode choice around those corridors, and maintaining those walking and cycling links. Those are just very high level thoughts as part of the long list at the moment. We wanted to give you the opportunity to partake ideas into that, and then as staff will be going through a shortlist process, working out what's feasible within the time period and the budget constraints, and we'll look to present that back as a future step.
So what is the time frame that you would expect it would take to do the turret road part of the thing? You know, by the time you do your bridge and the turret road works, not 15th Avenue, you know, because you can isolate that out separately. But what are we talking? You know, what's the normal time scale? Indicative.
The current construction program runs from January 27 through to January 29, so that's the full construction of the whole corridor, so 2 years. That can be, as we go through the ECI process, probably taken down somewhat, depending on how we do that, whether it's 1 lane, 2 lanes, night closures, full closures, etc. Those are the stagings that we've got to work through. Some of the other stagings are staged as in chunks of the road corridor itself, and currently we've got in the RFP 3 stages, and that's from Cameron down to Burrows down to Turret across to the Causeway. So if you was going to just take one of those chunks of the areas that you've just said there, it would probably take 6 to 7 months for one of those particular areas.
That's really major.
Yeah, a lot of the work is mainly servicing with services and deep lift surfacing around a lot of the junctions.
What's deep?
Deep lift. Yep, full construction, full depth reconstruction pavement instead of just the top layers, full depth.
That's the end of the presentation, sorry, so.
Yeah. It's a lot of food for thought there.
Could someone just outline the indicative timeframe? In other words, when you would have done the modelling, when the contractor is likely to be appointed, when the contractor is likely to report back on that aspect of it, and then I presume the public transport options and things would not be the contractor. I presume they might have ideas, but that would be more led by staff. Would I be correct in thinking that? And so when that report would also come, like, because at the moment it just looks a little bit like we know all the stuff's coming at us, but how soon will the different pieces be arriving?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll deal with the front end, and maybe Jason can deal more with the construction end. So the modelling scenarios are being done now. We're having to recalibrate our model to make sure it's up to date with the current flows. So we'll be out of that phase in the short-term month type timelines. Post that, we'll understand the implications of those scenarios on basically what are the problems that the ECI will need to consider. And then it will flow into the procurement process that Jason's leading. In that time between now and that start, it's our intent to make sure we pull together around with Waka Kotahi, Regional Council and ourselves, and what are the operational responses that we may need at the time. But there's a point there where it becomes the ECI's challenge, and we can suggest things in the mix, but it becomes a procurement process then, and they come back with potential solutions there. But to be able to offer different and solutions like extra buses and other things like that is absolutely part of the consideration. But we go through a procurement process, and maybe Jason, you could bring us up to date on the other elements.
Thank you. Just answering your question there, Councillor Crowther. When we look at the RFP process, the RFP which is due to go out in mid-June, and by the time that we get that back, which is a 6-week process, that'll be mid to end July. And then there's usually a 4-week process that we go through the TET evaluation, and then that we go into award. By the end of the year, we're looking October through to December. Although that we're going to have an award in place, and we come back to council on that, there is going to be a position that we have and we've been tabulating this before, the go/no-go position on the bridge structure itself. Now, that's one of the first things that we need to actually get across, and that's scheduled for November, December this year currently. We will.
Just to pick up on your question about public transport, Councillor Crowther, so whilst the contractor would help with things like traffic management, sort of any strategic or wholesale changes to the network would sit with the regional council as the PTA. I think the thing to add in, and Sean sort of already touched on this somewhat, is contrary to popular belief, the services that will be directly or indirectly impacted by this closure are well used. So whilst we think public transport can can really help with keeping the city moving, I think we need to be cognizant of actually how much capacity there is in the current network at peak times to support with that. Just looking at some of the stats, so at the moment, Route 40, that carries up to 400 people in each direction every day. That goes across Turret Road Bridge. Route 1, which runs on Devonport, which will be indirectly affected, that's over 300 people in each direction. And then if you look at the Cameron Road corridor, so at the southern end of Cameron Road, you've got Route 55 and Route 59. There's over 800 people that use that in each direction. That's before you get to our dedicated school services. So I pulled the numbers on the average number of children that use buses that use the Turret Road corridor. Per day, that averages over 800 children in each direction. So in the Turret Road corridor alone, we've got in the region of 1,200 passengers per day on our services that would be directly impacted by a closure. So these buses are well utilised in the peaks, and we need to explore options to make sure that we don't have a knee-jerk reaction where those customers feel impacted to the point where they make the choice of getting back in the vehicle and further contributing towards the congestion problem.
Yeah.
Further to your point, Mr. Chairman, about whether a complete closure is a possibility here, does it make sense that it is a complete closure except for buses, and that they can be guided through, or maybe you still got the basic concept of you haven't got traffic going through to make it easier for the construction workers, but you allow buses through, and it solves a lot of the problem with your PT and provides an alternative route. That may not be feasible, just thought I'd put it out there.
Yeah, and I think what staff are interested in hearing today is sort of the scope that committee members are interested in us exploring. Anything's possible. It will have benefits for bus passengers, but it might well have disbenefits for the construction and how much possession of the site they can have. So I think there's there's an opportunity for us to listen to how aspirational you want us to be, and then for staff to go away and then come back to you with, well, these are your options and these are the implications.
Councillor.
I was thinking the exact same, and I thought, is that too crazy to suggest? So good on you, James. But what I was thinking is that plus emergency services, because I'm just thinking, you know, the time delay to the hospital from anyone who lives in Welcome Bay and Mongatapu is really quite high risk if they've got to go right around those houses. So I love the idea personally of exploring emergency services plus buses, or you know, plus public transport. So just putting that out there.
There is a number of the methodologies that we're looking at the moment, and again, so I'll just hop on about the ECI process and working with those principal contractors to make sure that we are looking at the best options. But even through the buildability reviews, as soon as we'd hand over that site, whether it be a night works or day works, especially over the bridge, the equipment that's used, even if it's a relatively small crane, like a 40-ton crane, with its outriggers out, putting in the clip-on will take up the full width of that bridge, which is unfortunate, but there's other ways that we're looking at things which will mean that we don't open it up fully, and that we don't do night works, but we do it in stages, etc. But again, we're just working through all that.
Councillor.
I think to answer Ollie's question, I think everything should be in scope for sure, because I don't think there'll be many good options. I hope I'm really wrong on this, and I hope that we'll hear back from the contractor and they'll say, you'd never imagine what we found. We've got this brilliant solution that's going to sort it out. But you know, looking at the lay of the land, I just don't think there is any solution, and so therefore, you know, we have to really wind back the expectations. And I think you summed it up really well, Mike. But I think to get to that point that we don't have, not about gridlock, but certainly, you know, major, you know, hours-long delays and things like that, that it would have to be, I would have thought, some form of public transport or ride-sharing incentives. And I just look at the various roads and where they connect, and I think we've just got such limited options, but that's where I'll be hoping for innovation. And I don't know if it means that there is a route that public transport or ride share can be prioritised through to a limited extent. I was, the only encouraging thing was that at least Orrery Road wasn't quite as, it wasn't as red as Fraser Street. So I guess there's potential to get up to the roundabout, but then you look at what the arterial improvements will be at that Chadwick intersection, because looking how congested Chadwick is and further down Fraser, it's getting people through that logjam at that point will be a problem as well.
Through you, Mr. Chair. So we do look to other examples of where critical pieces of the network have been shut down. So Newmarket Viaduct in Auckland was another example. 200,000 vehicles a day had to replace the entire bridge. So both the construction methodology and the management of demand were the key success factors in this project. So it is a project that doesn't have a reputation because it didn't affect 200,000 people per day. And it was able to manage it. But the biggest effect that the Motorway Alliance that's up there felt was a suppression of demand. So the publication and the constant repetition of this is not going to be great, can you travel another way please, was the single most biggest factor in the success of that project. Its success was it wasn't known. And so that was a very strong lesson for managing transport systems. So two things, you know, provide more capacity or manage demand, and I think we've got to pull those levers, both of those levers very hard.
Councillor Scott.
Just as long as we're talking about crazy ideas and demand management, I mean, in this building, the one next door, there's part of 1,000 people, right? So they, in a sense, that demand for using the network is available to us to manage. Conversations with, I don't know if this is possible, but changing school holidays in negotiation with schools or any other major employer. And so going beyond just the infrastructure to say, are there ways of actually reducing the demand? Would be an interesting exercise, I would have thought. Yep.
Anyone else? Thank you, Sean.
Yeah, no, thanks a lot, all. That was the last slide. Yeah, we'll be reporting back. Sorry, I didn't actually have a next step slide. So we'll report back to you on what improvements we can find from alternative routes, but also that wider idea. We'll also be working through. It doesn't necessarily require. It's more of an operational level, that whole route protection, and making sure that as a route we're not going to be building too much on our alternative routes. And then as we go through that early contractor engagement, ECI or involvement, that ECI process will be back around this table almost without a doubt.
Well, thank you, everybody. That's coming to the conclusion of the meeting. I think it's been a pretty valuable discussion, actually. And we've opened more cans of worms than we've closed, but that's the way life is. Thank you for your participation, and I declare the meeting closed at 12:25.